Well, hello there. Welcome back to the Digging in the Dirt podcast. My name is Jonathan Trotter, and it is such a privilege to spend this time with you. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, hello, wave at you, or whether you're listening in on Spotify or Apple Podcast, welcome to this podcast. I have worn my happy shirt today because we're going to talk about depression, because that's fun. But it has to be talked about because it's something that so many of us have experienced or will experience. It's it's a thing that so many of us, if we don't experience it personally, will experience what it's like to have a loved one or a friend or someone that we're even just acquainted with go through this stuff, coworker or something. And this is hard. This is really, really hard stuff. It doesn't always have to end in darkness, but man, oh man, when a person's in it, they feel stuck, they feel mired, they feel down, they feel really, really dark, like all the energy has been sucked from them. And I just want to validate that experience. I have been there before. It is a horrible, horrible experience. We're going to talk some about it. I'm going to read the chapter on depression from my book called Digging in the Dirt. And I hope that it's an encouragement to you, whether you feel these things personally or whether they just resonate because you've maybe seen this as part of someone else's story. I hope that this matters to you as well. I have had the privilege and the honor of sitting with a lot of people who were feeling themselves slipping into depression. I've sat with a lot of people who were really deep in a depression, clinically in my counseling internships, but also in Cambodia when I was working as a pastoral counselor and just walking alongside of people who were hurting. Sometimes the depression is in response to some, very normal, hard circumstances, and a depressive response is very normal. And sometimes it's just stuff that's going on inside of them. Their outside life doesn't look all that bad. And people could say, hey, what is wrong with you? Everything's going well. Honestly, a lot of times clients will say that to themselves. It's like, what is wrong with me? Everything's going well. Why do I feel so bad? But they do feel so bad. And I have been there. And so I want to share some thoughts on that with you here today. As usual, the show notes will include a bunch of the links that I mentioned, resources and articles. So be sure to check that out if that's something that might be helpful for you. Okay, well, shall we jump in? When depression descends. This is on page 63 in Digging in the Dirt. I start the chapter with an author's note, so we'll just start there because this is important too. This chapter should not be used to diagnose or treat clinical depression. If you are having thoughts of hurting yourself or attempting suicide, please seek out a medical and or mental health professional immediately. Visit the Lifeline. Now, the links have changed since I wrote the book. You can try 988lifeline.org. If you're in the United States, you just dial 988. A list of international suicide prevention hotlines can be viewed at psychologytoday.com. Just search for international suicide prevention hotlines. Okay. I'll say a little bit more at the end for resources and numbers, but the main thing is 988lifeline.org, or just dial 988 for those in the United States. All right, we'll go on to the chapter now. Here goes. Page 63. When depression descends. It feels like a leaden mantle descending over everything, blotting out the sun, joy, and the belief that there is anything good in the world. It leaves your feet bolted to the floor and your heart frozen in the empty void of black space. It feels like liquid cement pouring into your body, heavy and thick, slowly solidifying, hardening, restricting movement. It feels like your chest is being crushed, like a polio victim without an iron lung, desperately searching for the energy to overcome diaphragmatic paralysis. It feels like a suffocation. It doesn't always feel like sadness. It might look like incessant weeping, but it might also look like staring at a blank wall for 15 minutes, unmoving. even if you're in ministry, even if you love your wife and kids, even if you love your job and have enough money, even if you have a fulfilling ministry, both on and offline, even if you work with therapists and help pastor a church, even if you love the Psalms and know about lament and have written extensively about emotional health, even if you've studied depression and sat with suicidal clients in a counseling center, the suicidal patients in an ER, even if. Sometimes it's just there, and it is so terribly heavy. I have been there. And still, after our unplanned transition back to America, our dislocation and eventual resettling, COVID, a dark winter, and political chaos, it still threatens. Occasionally, I get a whiff of the darkness, and it turns my stomach sour. If you've been there, if you've felt these things, please know this: you are not alone. The scariest point for me was when I started thinking about ending my life. I never developed a plan, which is a blaring warning sign, especially if the person has the means to carry out the plan. But I was ruminating more and more about death and dying, and it scared me tremendously. In Cambodia, so many prescription medications do not require a prescription and are available in blister packs at the cash register. This can be handy, but it's also dangerous. I had started taking an occasional non-narcotic pain medication to help me sleep. We had neighbors on both sides of our row house who kept very late hours. So let me pause here. We were in a row house that had people on both sides. It kind of was three or four stories, but pretty narrow with people on both sides. So we had, back to the book, we had neighbors on both sides of our row house who kept very late hours. On one side, it was drunk karaoke followed by the smashing and screaming of domestic violence. On the other side, it was a bit of a house turned warehouse where they repackaged boxes for local distribution. Think screeching packing tape until 1 or 2 a.m. nightly. Well, the packaging center was about 3 feet away from the head of our bed, through the wall. The drunken abuse was about 5 feet from the foot of our bed. Bricks and a little plaster and tile were not enough. I was not sleeping well, and I was getting more and more anxious and agitated. So I started taking this medication to help me sleep. Looking back, I think the spiritual, environmental, and psychological stresses brought me to the tipping point, and the medication nudged me over the edge. In any sort of Christian community, there can be an immense incentive to hide things like this. But when it comes to depression, silence can be deadly. And while I certainly understand the reasons for hiding depression can lengthen your misery, shielding you from help and resources. Depression is very treatable once it's identified. Let me pause. I would also say it's very treatable by people who know how to treat it. Just a little caveat here. Not everybody, not every pastor knows how to treat depression. And I've had clients who've received terrible advice from pastors who were maybe meaning well, but were not giving good sort of quality mental health advice. So I think I say a little bit more about this later in the chapter. Okay, back to the book. Depression is very treatable once it's identified. So don't hide, and please, oh please, don't feel like you're a failed Christian just because you're depressed. You are not less than or anything of the sort. You just may need a little bit of extra support for a time. I did, and I still do from time to time. I talked with a doctor. I'll never forget the day he said, you know, it's a rare side effect, but it is a documented side effect of that particular medication. I went home and threw those blister packs in the trash like they were filled with poison. This is in the section, called How to Respond, that is, tell someone. Okay, back to the book. I increased the frequency of meetings with 2 good friends, one of whom was a therapist and one of whom was a pastor. I broadened my support base. I changed my diet, reducing processed foods and sugar, increasing fruits and vegetables. I started exercising more. If you're not sure, but you think you might be depressed, please consult with your doctor and or a mental health professional. You do not have to do this alone. There are so many resources available, and there are so many treatment modalities that are proven to help. Talk therapy, medications, lifestyle changes, etc. You do not have to do this alone. If someone hears your story and tells you that you just need to try harder, or read your Bible more, or root out the sin in your life, or be more disciplined, or some such nonsense, just smile and nod, turn around, and run the other direction towards someone who will give you good advice, because that person isn't. How to respond? Educate yourself. Sometimes the depression is so thick that you do not have it in you to do any sort of online research or reading. That's okay. If that's where you're at, reach out to someone and skip this part. But if you can, and if you want to, remember that you have access to a whole host of online resources. I typically turn to the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic online for medically accurate information that's written for non-medical folks. The NHS has a short depression self-assessment tool that might also be a helpful place to start. All right, please don't laugh, but I really appreciated the material in the book Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Dummies by Rhena Branch and Rob Willson. Their section on depression has been immensely helpful for me and several friends. So check it out. Additional resources. This is the first time that I've written so explicitly about depression. Here are some writings in a sermon about related things. So I'm just going to tell you, not read it from the book. I wrote an article called Outlawed Grief. It was one of the first articles that I actually ever wrote. And I rewrote it and published it kind of in conjunction with another article on the Gottman Institute. So if you search Gottman.com and Outlawed Grief, you'll find that article. I wrote another book called C.S. Lewis and the Deeper Magic. Actually, it was C.S. Lewis, Sadness and What Eternal Hope Looks Like. And that appeared at on Relevant online. So Relevant magazine. If you just search my name, C.S. Lewis, Sadness and What Eternal Hope Looks Like, you'll find it. And then there's a sermon that I preached in Cambodia that is online. If you search Trotters for One, our family website, for Despair is Where Hope Lives. Despair is Where Hope Lives. Again, these are all in the show notes, so you can check that out. All right, back to the book. Remember, you are not alone. The promises are true, and you are not alone. And I wrap up the chapter with something from the Mayo Clinic called When to Get Emergency Help. And I want to just read that here as well. This is again from the Mayo Clinic. If you think you may hurt yourself or attempt suicide, call 911 or your local emergency number immediately. Also, consider these options if you're having suicidal thoughts. Call your doctor or mental health professional. Call a suicide hotline number, like what we talked about before. Reach out to a close friend or a loved one. Contact a minister, spiritual leader, or someone else in your faith community. If you have a loved one who is in danger of suicide or who has made a suicide attempt, make sure someone stays with that person. Call 911 or your local emergency number immediately. Or if you think you can do so safely, take the person to the nearest hospital emergency room. Okay, that's the chapter on depression from Digging in the Dirt. Again, those were some dark times for me in Cambodia. I can sit here and think back to that and feel that concrete sort of enveloping me, and that is not a happy feeling. At the same time, I'm so very grateful. There wasn't one thing that fixed it. There wasn't one magic bullet. There really never is. Medication is not a magic bullet, but sometimes medication can be really helpful. Get that from a doctor. Mental health counseling is not a magic bullet. It often helps. Maybe it doesn't, and maybe that's because you don't have good vibe with the therapist, or maybe the therapist, I don't know. There could be a lot of reasons, but it is worth trying. It's worth trying a lot of things. It's worth trying lifestyle. It's worth trying getting in the sun, getting a little bit more exercise, along with all of the other things. So I hope that this has been an encouragement to you. If you feel yourself in that space, know that space, that darkness doesn't have to last forever. But like I said several times in the chapter, you do not have to do it alone. Please don't even try to do it alone. Reach out. Don't be isolated, and don't isolate yourself. People want to help you. And and they'll be there for you. And if you can't find people that'll be there for you, keep looking and call those hotlines, and keep talking with people until you find someone who will sit with you and listen to that pain and walk with you. Ideally, walk with you sort of out of it, however long that takes. So, man, from my heart to yours, this is big stuff. What the next chapter that we look at, that'll be fun. It's called Lament, a lament for the American church. So we'll see how that flies. Kind of looking forward to that, and not in a weird way, but I'll stop. I'll shut up. It's almost dinner time here where I'm at. Thank you again so much for hanging out. If you have questions, if you have comments, you can leave those whether on YouTube or on those podcasts. If you have a request, something that you would like us to address and talk about in a future episode, there are links in the show notes for how you can submit requests like that through a Google form. So may the grace and peace of God be with you, very near, very close this week. Okay? Go with God.